Oh, here we go. It's 11-0 against 11-0 in the game. Jim Harbaugh got one over on Ohio State last season, won the Big Ten championship, went to the college football playoff. The Buckeyes, 7.5-point favorites at home at noon Eastern time on Saturday. The loser of this game might still be alive in the college football playoff. The winner is going to be one win away in a game they're going to be favored by 20-plus probably in the Big Ten championship game. These are Dennis Dodd's brand new power rankings with Ohio State at 2, Michigan at 4. Chris Hassel, Brady Quinn, and Danny Cannell, joined now by Dennis Dodd. Dennis, blink twice if you're okay.
There it is.
He's okay. All right.
Good.
Dennis, huge game this week. Obviously, the biggest game in the country. Brady, you're going to be there on the sidelines for it. Do you think the loser still has a legitimate a chance to get to the college football playoff?
I think Ohio State has a slightly better chance. Now, it depends on what happens around them. It depends on the score of the game, whether it's close or not. But I think the selection committee, if Michigan is the loser, will have, I guess, more ammunition to keep them out because of that non-conference schedule. But it's going to be tough. I mean, you have to tell me if LSU is going to beat Georgia. That would take up 2 spots from the SEC and almost eliminate the loser of this game. But I think it starts with a close game. I actually think Michigan has a heck of a chance of winning this game because it's going to be in weather. I just ran into Jimbo Fisher here at Texas A&M, and he said, what's the forecast? And I said, well, 34 degrees and cloudy, chance of snow. Well, we saw what happened to Ohio State last year in that sort of situation at Michigan. But historically, this season, all you have to do is you look at any time they run into weather. Obviously, Northwestern was a struggle. A little bit of Maryland's cold is going to hurt those skilled players. So and they are at home. So if that happens to be the case, I think Michigan is a better team than they were last year. Doesn't mean they're better than Ohio State, but I think they're actually better than they were last year.
My biggest concern right now with Michigan is J.J. McCarthy, and it's not what he's capable of, it's just we haven't seen it. And it seems like Jim Harbaugh and his staff are reluctant to put him in a position where they're really going to force the football down the field vertically. And versus Ohio State, you're probably going to have to do that. They're just too talented on the outside, and I do think C.J. Stroud at home, I'm looking at the weather forecast, too. I'm from Columbus, so it doesn't look like what we saw with the gale force winds there in Chicago when they took on Northwestern in Evanston. It's going to be a different game, and I think Michigan's going to have to play catch-up. They haven't been challenged with a passing attack like Ohio State's all year long. So at some point, J.J. McCarthy is going to have to put this offense on his back. This is that matchup. We'll see if they can do it. And then the only concern I think I have for Ohio State is the running back depth at this point, right? Dalen Hayden, the freshman, he's been carrying them of late because of the injuries to Mayan Williams, Trayvon Henderson. I wouldn't be shocked, though, Danny, if both those guys are back or at least playing through injuries to play in this game. And obviously Blake Corum is a huge question mark.
That's what I was going to say. The biggest concern for me is the health of Blake Corum. Where is he? I know he was walking around as part of his NIL deal giving away 300 turkeys, which is awesome and really cool to see. But to me, the biggest misjudgment I had at the beginning of the season was Jim Harbaugh was going to switch to J.J. McCarthy to open up this offense, to take more shots down the field. Maybe Jim Harbaugh doesn't want to. Maybe he's like, we get a little more athleticism with J.J. McCarthy, but we don't need that big play down the field. I think if Blake Corum is healthy, they're going to try to do the same thing they did last year, which is bully Ohio State on both sides of the football. I don't think they're going to try to deviate. I don't think they want to get in a shootout, clearly. And I think that determines the ball game, is if Michigan's defense can pressure C.J. Stroud, who, when he does get pressured, like a lot of quarterbacks, gets more uncomfortable and isn't able to have some of the prolific success that he has across the rest of the season. So I think it's a fascinating matchup.
It is, but I just think this Ohio State team is so much better up front than where they were a year ago. They're not a finesse group. Their offensive linemen, they're gigantic. They average about 318 pounds per man across their front. And defensively, under Jim Knowles, they become so much better in stopping the run. So, again, I think it's all going to fall on J.J. McCarthy. Like, these are those games where, as a quarterback, you got to find a way of putting your team in a position to win. And this is going to be one of the first ones where he's really challenged to do that.
Reminiscent of that 2006 game, that 1 versus 2. You were playing quarterback at Notre Dame at the time,
I was.
right?
We got beat by Michigan earlier in that year.
Your Notre Dame Fighting Irish have a big game this week against USC. Another game, Dennis, with playoff implications out there in L.A.
Yeah, I mean, they've won 5 in a row, and this is not just doesn't look like a walkover for USC. A couple of things. USC emotionally, emptied the wagon, I thought, on Saturday, and that'll be a big challenge for Lincoln Riley. I know it's Notre Dame. I know it's arguably their biggest rival, with a chance to go, with their playoff chances still sitting out there. But, I think there has to be an emotional letdown. You have this UCLA game, which is for everything to stay alive in the Pac-12 in the playoff. And then Notre Dame comes in, frankly, playing free and easy. They've been looking really good. The Boston College result, while it was expected, was still impressive. So, no, I think this USC has to watch out. They lose this, they're out of the playoff race. They're still going to play for the Pac-12 championship, but they've got to stay on point against a really improving Notre Dame team.
I mean, Notre Dame's improved mightily, but in particular up front in the trenches. We just talked about that with Ohio State, Michigan. And some of these bigger rivalry games, bigger matchups, it comes down to those one-on-one matchups up front. And Notre Dame's offensive line has become absolute bullies. And they've got 3 running backs in the backfield with Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, and Chris Tyree, which all are featured in different ways and have different capabilities. And in my opinion, the best tight end in the country, Michael Mayer, who's been phenomenal this year all year long, who they can go to in the passing game in that matchup. And their defense has been extremely, extremely stingy. I mean, Ben Morrison, their freshman cornerback, has 5 interceptions in the last 3 games. He had 3 this past week versus BC. But, I mean, Isaiah Foskey just set the career sack record. They've got some pieces, I think, to really win this game if that's how it plays out. I mean, if Notre Dame tries to get in a shootout, at least in the passing game, the way the passing game's been this year with USC, that's not advantageous for them.
I think Marcus Freeman deserves a ton of credit for keeping this team together. I mean, remember, it started off rough. You lose to Ohio State, it's like, okay, Ohio State's top-ranked team in the country. Lose to Marshall, lose to Stanford, panic starts to set in. Is this the right hire? You're trying to keep the locker room together, make sure recruits are staying committed. Not only does he do all that, but then they start this streak of winning games, and I think USC is going to have their hands full. And how about the role that Notre Dame is playing in the playoff picture with their tentacles running throughout? Like, if Ohio State does lose, one of their best wins on their resume would be against Notre Dame. Notre Dame beat both teams that are playing in the ACC title in Clemson and North Carolina. And then here again, they could potentially knock out USC of the playoffs. It's just amazing to see that they're still playing this huge role in the college football world.
And by the way, you know why that's possible? Because they're independent.
Yeah.
So stop trying to make them join a conference, people. It's way better.
If they were in the
this way.
ACC, maybe they'd be playing for a conference championship.
They're already the conference champion. They beat both teams already. You want to
No, but they could have made it official.
Get them out.
They would have won.
Get them out of here.
They could have avoided Marshall.
The last thing I'll say about this matchup is special teams. Brian Mason, their special teams coordinator, who was not a Broyles Awards semifinals, which is an absolute shock. They've got 7 block kicks. Their punter has been phenomenal. He's a semifinalist for the Ray Guy. They have been phenomenal on special teams. Keep an eye on that as far as block punts, block field goals, returnings, and obviously, playing the field position battle.
All right, our show is produced by a Florida State alum. Of course, Danny Cannell is here. He's
About time we talk Seminoles. Let's go.
Noah's a different person than Danny. But Danny and Noah believe that Florida State could beat anyone in the country right now. You buying that?
I think pretty close. I mean, the role they're on right now, and Jordan Travis maturing before our eyes as a dual threat weapon. I mean, why not? I mean, I going back to Ohio State, Michigan, I think there's one dominant team in the country, and that's maybe Georgia. Even they've shown flaws this year, but I think Ohio State or Michigan in the right setting could be beat. I think Florida State, I don't know if they're back. Is Texas back? No. Is Florida State back? Significant progress. I mean, there is a team behind Clemson in that division, 3 games behind, but still 8-3, with still a chance to win 10 this year. And all credit to Mike Norvell along, way down the course of his career. But like Marcus Freeman, people were ready to give up on him before this season, and he has turned it around. Or Florida State. Danny, I will give the floor to you because you know more about this than anybody.
No, I do, and I feel great about where Florida State is. I don't want to feel too great because you don't want to start gloating before a game against Florida, who are coming off a loss to Vanderbilt. That would salvage their season if they were able to beat the Noles in Tallahassee. But this is probably the first time in 6 or 7 years that I can remember that Florida State is beating opponents handily that they're supposed to, blowing out teams like Syracuse, blowing out non-conference opponents like Louisiana. And I know those aren't the biggest names, blowing out a rivalry in Miami, 45-3, taking care of their business and being on the verge of potentially a 9-win season. This has been a long road back, and I'm glad that maybe I can't say every Florida State fan was patient with Mike Norvell, But I'm glad the administration gave them an extension to say, we realize how hard it was to take over in the year of COVID. We realize what a monster turnaround and turnover this roster needed to see, and trusted that Mike Norvell was the right guy for the job. So if they're able to beat Florida, if they're able to get to 10 wins, then you can start building in the offseason with another recruiting class and go out in the transfer portal, which Mike Norvell has done with a tremendous amount of success to address the needs on this team. I think it sets up Florida State to be in the conversation to contend for an ACC championship, which is something nobody would have thought at the beginning of the season.
They're on such a good trajectory right now. I think if you look at both these two teams, it's the exact opposite of what you'd be looking for, right? Like Mike Norvell and what he's building. You talked about the improvement of Jordan Travis. I mean, he's a big reason why. And then for Florida, I mean, I know you're in your first year with Bill Napier, but I mean, my goodness, man. I mean, and again, credit to Clark. We've talked about Vanderbilt, the job he's done building that program up. But in year one, like, you still have the better athletes. And then it feels like their defense has kind of given up on them to some degree. Anthony Richardson played okay, but just obviously not well enough to be able to get them win. I mean, that game wasn't really even close. So this is one where you keep saying if. Florida State's gonna roll Florida. I know it's a rivalry game. See, he doesn't like saying that. I'll say it for you. They're to the point where I think you can legitimately have that expectation right now with the way Mike Norvell has his team playing.
Florida State, great rivalry. One of many great rivalries this week in college football. Dennis, if you had to pick one from the games this week, what's your favorite?
Oh gosh, Ohio State, Michigan. Usually the Iron Bowl, but less implications on that this year, obviously. But just the hate involved in that game. I was at that game last year, and I've been to quite a few of them in the snow. And there was so much angst for Michigan finally breaking through after, 7 or 8 years of Ohio State dominating this. And if you think about it, this rivalry is still defined by Bo and Woody. I mean, we were talking about Michigan. I don't think Jim Harbaugh wants to go downfield with J.J. McCarthy. If Blake Corum is healthy, they're just going to try to pound it and hold the ball. He's been channeling, Bo for like 8 or 9 years now since he's been there. Same at Ohio State. Ohio State more with Urban, taking them into the 21st century, and then Ryan Day being the perfect replacement. But this thing is just great. It starts at noon. Obviously, you guys are going to be there. It's going to be fantastic, and I'm just ready to go.
I mean, look, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, so I'm very familiar with both. We're recruited by both schools. Ended up choosing Notre Dame, so maybe I fell somewhere in between. But I can recall as a young man, driving up to go visit Michigan. And when you're going up there to go visit, and it's Ohio State Michigan week, the one thing you can't do is speed. And there's one thing my dad always did. He never drove the speed limit. And I just remember asking one time, I was like, Dad, why are you driving so slow? He goes, son, when we got Ohio State plates, we're in the state of Michigan, and this matchup is this week, he goes, you're going to get a ticket. And that's just how it is. It's life between those two schools and how they view one another. I've listened to Coach Meyer say it constantly. It's a way of life. It's that goal that they put up as soon as the season ends. It's that game that they, X off on their calendar. You start crossing out all the M's everywhere over the facility every single year. So to me, it's the most fun. I remember growing up, going to the games and watching them. And I get excited to see it. It'll be fun.
Can I make a case for Florida State, Florida? Am I just going to get booed off the stage here? I mean, it feels like I'm going to get booed off the set. The problem with it is I don't even know if I'd make the case for Florida State, Florida, or Florida State versus Miami, especially since we're the only ones that play both of them, as they don't play each other. But, talk about peak rivalry. Late 80s, 90s, early 2000s, when the national championship felt like it was on the line, when Florida State was playing Florida or Florida State was playing Miami, it was tough to beat. But then you have the tradition of Ohio State, Michigan. I would say the Iron Bowl, similar stature. That's the thing that makes college football great, though, is the fact we can even debate these. And you can make really strong cases for all of them.
And some great names elsewhere, too. The Egg Bowl. Yep. Leach against Kiffin.
Are we allowed to call it the Civil War?
We don't. I don't know.
Okay,
we don't even have the Apple.
Graphic.
We don't even have the Apple Cup.
Apple Cup.
That's another great matchup.
It is. Yeah. How about the Heroes game, Iowa, Nebraska?
Didn't know that was what they called it.
Yep. Yeah, they made up a fake trophy for the Heroes game, Iowa, Nebraska. Hey, Dennis, thank you so much, man. A&M's got those great facilities, and they put the poor guy in a closet
right
for the segment.
Well,
what's up
maybe
with that?
They might have asked for some of the money back. I don't know. You're drawing out with the way the season's going.
All right, Dennis. Full Dennis Dodd Power Rankings on CBSSports.com. Cover 3 podcast, latest episode. They're hitting on all kinds of things, including the lessons learned from what we saw from Ohio State's defense against Maryland. Are they gettable ahead of the showdown with Michigan?
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.